Días a todos
Good
y
morning,
todas,
everyone,
y muy buenos días
and good
especialmente al
morning, particularly
secretario de Estado Rubio y a su
Secretary of
delegación.
State Rubio and his
Secretario
delegation,
Rubio,
Secretary Rubio.
como lo mencioné
As
ayer por
I
la tarde en
said to
nuestras
you
conversaciones,
yesterday
le
afternoon in our
damos la
conversations,
bienvenida a
we
Guatemala y
welcome
saludamos al
you to
gobierno del
Guatemala and
presidente
we
Donald Trump.
greet
Su
Donald Trump's
presencia
government
hoy
administration. Your
aquí
presence here
abre
today
nuevas oportunidades de
opens
colaboración
new
entre
opportunities
nuestros
for
países.
cooperation between our
Guatemala
countries.
es y seguirá siendo
Guatemala
un
is
socio
and,
con
is and
Estados
will
Unidos,
continue to
un
be
socio para
the
abordar los
United
problemas
States
que como
partner
región
to address
afrontamos,
the issues
pero
that
también
we
un socio
face
para
as
avanzar en construir
countries,
sociedades
but
más
also to
dignas y
build
con mayores
more
oportunidades
dignified
de desarrollo.
societies with
Nuestros
greater
países
opportunities
comparten
for development.
176
Our
años de
countries
relaciones
share
diplomáticas que nos unen
176
y nos
years
trazan
of
un horizonte
diplomatic
común.
relations that
En
bring
esta
us
época nos
together
corresponde
and
enfrentar
present a
juntos
common
los
horizon
grandes
for
retos del
both.
siglo
We
XXI,
are now
entre los que se
confronted with
encuentra la
the
migración,
challenges of
la
21st
seguridad
century,
fronteriza,
migration,
el
border
combate al
security,
crimen
and combat
transnacional.
of transnational crime.
Por eso,
For
estos
this
retos han
reason,
sido también
these
el núcleo
challenges have
de la
also
agenda de
been
trabajo
the
que hoy
core of the work
compartimos.
agenda that we
Estos
now
desafíos deben
share.
ser
These
atendidos
challenges need to be
integralmente
addressed
y de manera
comprehensively
conjunta
and
para
jointly
garantizar la
to
estabilidad
guarantee
regional, la dignidad
regional
de nuestros
stability, the
pueblos
dignity
y
of
la
our
seguridad
peoples,
de nuestros
and the
países.
security of our countries.
Como gobierno,
As a
tenemos
government,
claridad
we have
en la
clarity
visión de futuro que
of
estamos
the
construyendo
vision
para
of the
Guatemala,
future
una
that
visión
we are building
conjunta
for Guatemala,
para
a
todos los
joint vision
pueblos y
for all the
sectores
peoples and
de
sectors
nuestro país.
of our country.
Creemos en
We
un
believe
nuevo modelo
in a
migratorio
new
que permita
migration
atender
model
de
that
manera
will allow
eficiente y humanitaria
us to
el
address
fenómeno de la
the
migración,
phenomenon of
promoviendo
migration in a
soluciones a
humanitarian
las
and
causas que
comprehensive
han
manner
obligado a
to
tantos
address
guatemaltecos y
the causes that
guatemaltecas
have forced so
a
many
dejar sus
Guatemalan men and
comunidades,
women to
sus
leave their
familias,
communities, their
su
families,
país.
their country.
Como parte de esta
As part of
estrategia,
this
hemos puesto
strategy,
en marcha el
we have
Plan Retorno al
implemented
Hogar,
the
el
Return
cual nos permite
Home
que el
Plan
regreso de
that
nuestros
makes it
hermanos y
possible for
hermanas
our
sea
brethren
digno y que su
back home to be
reintegración
dignified
sea
and that their
facilitada.
reintegration
A
be
los migrantes
facilitated. To
en Estados
migrants
Unidos les
in the United
reiteramos,
States, we
no están
repeat,
solos,
you are not alone.
estamos con ustedes.
We are with you.
Nuestro gobierno
Our
trabaja
government
con la
works
mira en el objetivo de
with
procurar
our
su
sight
dignidad y
to
seguridad y
ensure
resolver
your
la
dignity and
crisis migratoria.
safety
En
and
este
to
momento
resolve
nos
the
permitirá
migration
crear las
crisis will allow us
condiciones
to
para
create
buscar
conditions to
soluciones de largo
find
plazo.
long-term solutions.
En este marco nos
In this
comprometemos
framework,
a
we
ampliar
make a
las
commitment to
capacidades
broaden the
para que más
capacities
guatemaltecas y guatemaltecos
that
puedan
allow
regresar
more
a su hogar,
Guatemalan men
a
and women to
Guatemala, en
come
donde
back
los
to their
recibiremos
home,
de manera
Guatemala, where
digna
we
y con
will
mayores
welcome you
oportunidades.
with the
En
dignity and
este
with more
marco,
opportunities.
hemos
In this
acordado
framework,
aumentar
we
en un
have agreed
40%
to
el número de
increase
vuelos de personas
by
deportadas,
40% the number
tanto
of
de
flights of
retornados con
deportees,
nacionales
both
como de
national
deportados de
returnees
otras
as well as
nacionalidades para
deportees
su
from other
ulterior
nationalities
repatriación.
for their
Los detalles de
ulterior
este proceso se
repatriation. The
discutirán en mesas de
details of this
trabajo
process
binacionales
will be
que se establecerán
discussed in
para el efecto.
binational working groups to
Sin
be
embargo,
established for
la
that
respuesta
purpose.
permanente a la
However, the
migración
permanent
es traer el
response to
desarrollo
migration is to bring
para que la gente no
development
tenga que
for
dejar el
people
país.
not to have to leave
Por
the
esa
country.
razón,
For
una
this
delegación
reason, a
liderada por el gobierno de
delegation
Guatemala y
led
con
by the
el
government of
acompañamiento del
Guatemala
sector
and with the
privado
support of the private
realizará
sector
una visita
will
de alto nivel a
visit,
Washington,
will
D.C. en las
perform a
siguientes semanas.
high-level visit
Este
to
encuentro
Washington,
permitirá
D.C.
crear
in
acuerdos
coming
en
weeks
materia
to create
económica,
agreements
inversión y
in terms
desarrollo
of
productivo,
economic productive
asegurando un
development
impacto positivo
and
y
investment
tangible
to
para Guatemala.
ensure tangible
Por otra
impact,
parte,
positive impact for
reconocemos que la
Guatemala. On the
seguridad
other hand,
fronteriza
we
es clave
know that
para
border
abordar estos
security is key
desafíos.
to address these
Entendemos que
challenges. We
cuidando y
understand that
protegiendo el
by
territorio de Guatemala,
protecting Guatemala's
cuidamos y
territory,
protegemos la
we care
región,
for and
como lo
protect
hemos
the
venido
region as
haciendo
we
con
have been doing
iniciativas como el
with
Cinturón de
initiatives
Fuego
at
en la frontera con
the
México
Fire
y
Belt
las brigadas
with
especiales de
Mexico and the
operaciones de
special
selva en Petén.
forest
Por ello,
operations in
hemos compartido con
Petén,
el secretario
Guatemala. For
Rubio la
that reason,
creación
we have
de
shared
la
with
Fuerza de
Secretary
Tarea de
Rubio
Control y
the
Protección
creation, the
Fronteriza
protection for
en la
border
frontera
control
este de
and
nuestro
protection
país.
task force in
A lo largo
in
de
the
los
northern border of our country,
300
along
kilómetros
the
de
almost
frontera,
300
una fuerza
kilometers of border,
combinada
a
de la
combined
Policía
force
Nacional
of the
Civil y del
National Civil
Ejército
Police and
Nacional
the National
velarán por
Armed
proteger y
Forces that
combatir
will
todas las
protect and
formas
combat
de
all
crimen
forms
transnacional.
of
Con una
transnational crime
frontera
with a
fortalecida
border
y
that has
segura,
been strengthened and
garantizamos
which is
la paz
secure.
y
We
seguridad de
guarantee
nuestros
the
pueblos.
peace and security of our
Hemos
people.
solicitado el
We have
restablecimiento de los
requested the
programas de
reestablishment
cooperación
of
en materia
cooperation
de
programs in terms
desarrollo
of
y seguridad y
development and
agradecemos
security,
la
and
anuencia del
we
secretario
appreciate the
Rubio para
approval by
considerar
Secretary
problemas
Rubio
prioritarios
to consider
para el combate
priority
al crimen
problems to combat the transnational crime, including narco-traffic, and particularly combating the trafficking of fentanyl, the trafficking of persons, border security, and prevent the conditions that produce the Guatemalans' migration. In this regard, we thank Secretary Rubio for the letter dated today, where he expresses his support for the establishment of a partnership for the development of a priority infrastructure established by my government, ground infrastructure, air infrastructure, sea infrastructure, and rail infrastructure, including the metro. Secretary, we appreciate your expressions of support to democracy, respect for the sovereign decision of the people in the ballots, combat of corruption, and strengthening democratic institutions. Guatemala is a country of people who are hardworking, who are solidary, and who get ahead, dignified people with commitment with the present and future of Guatemala. We will continue to act with firmness to build a safer country with dignity, prosperity, and democracy. And with these objectives, we know that the United States is a key partner. Thank you very much.
Escuchamos al señor presidente de la República de
We
Guatemala.
have heard
Es el
the
momento de
President of the
escuchar al
Republic of
secretario de
Guatemala,
Estado,
and now we
señor
give the
Marco
floor
Rubio.
to Mr. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State of the United States.
Mr. President, thank you very much for having us and welcoming us so openly. You gave me so much time last night and this morning as well. I think this has been such an impactful visit that there was an earthquake that we felt. It's the first time I've ever felt an earthquake in my life. I was awake at 1 a.m. I felt some movement. I thought maybe I was dizzy. I don't know. And then I realized this morning that no, there was a small earthquake. I'd never experienced that in Miami. So that was the impact of this trip. In all seriousness, thank you very much. First, I'd like to commend you for your commitment to democracy, to institutions. We said last night that democracy really is a modern moment. During most of the history of humanity, democracy has only existed for under 300 years approximately, and it's difficult, it's easy to write, hard to establish, because it's not hard to maintain, because it's not natural. The idea that people can govern themselves through the ballot box in a republic where they put the power in the hands of elected officials to determine the destiny of a country while always answering to the people again at the polls. That is not easy, and each era, each generation must defend it. And I'd like to commend you for your commitment to defending the institutions of a republic, and we will continue to work together with you so that you can achieve what you wish to achieve along that road. I'd like to thank you again for the commitment you've made regarding migration, which is an issue that affects us. Guatemala is a country that confronts all aspects of what's happening in our hemisphere. You are a destination, you are also a transit country, as well as you have had many people who have had to leave this country to seek out other opportunities. And on top of all that, you've had to face the fact that geographically you are in the middle of a massive drug and drug trafficking industry that uses your country as a transshipment point for moving this poison that is on its way to the United States. And I thank you for all of your cooperation, which we will continue to strengthen in order to intervene and prevent it not only from coming to the United States, but to prevent it from corrupting the institutions of this country and harming your economic plans. I'm very pleased to have signed that letter today in support of everything that we can do, but specifically the opportunity that exists for the Army Corps of Engineers of the U.S. to work together with your government to create preliminary plans that are necessary in order to build a modern port and everything that is necessary in order to have an economy that moves forward. These projects, as they progress, will create employment in the short term and in construction and labor, which is important because that builds a middle class, but in the long term, it will position Guatemala as a hub of economic activity in the region, a vision that takes some time to build, but it will be something positive and really revolutionary for the future of this country. We'd also like to thank you, and we're doing everything we can. And finally, we thank you very much for your support and the relationship that you already have with Taiwan, another democracy. It's not easy in a world where there is a lot of pressure to change that recognition and to break those ties, but you have always stood firm, and we look for opportunities for that, not only to be diplomatic relationship, but for it also to be an economic relationship with investments and opportunities. So in all of these areas, we will continue to work together, two peoples who are not only allies and neighbors, but we are united by a long history, and there are so many things that we have in common in our cultures and our cooperation. So I'd like to thank you, and briefly in English, if I may, I'd like to say a few words. And he speaks English perfectly well, just so you know, if you didn't know that. His English is perfect. His English is better than my Spanish.
I just want to say a few words. First, I want to thank this very warm reception that I've received here from our allies, our partners in Guatemala, with whom we have a long history of diplomatic and economic and cultural engagement. We're not just neighbors, we're allies, we're friends, and I think that will be evidenced by the work that we've done here in the hours that we have been here. The very important offer of cooperation, which was already existing. Guatemala was already accepting deportation flights of their nationals who were returning home, and not just accepting them as deportees, but reintegrating them into society. In fact, I want to thank the business community here, who very firmly has said that this is an important part of bringing back their brothers and sisters and reintegrating them into the economic hopes and dreams as a labor force for the future. And so I think that's a very important step by the government and also by the private sector, which has been so supportive. The President, who's made the offer today, then we'll be working on the details of all of this, but the offer to increase these flights and these deportations by 40%. It's very important for us in terms of the migratory situation that we're facing. His willingness to accept not just nationals, but those from other nationalities as they seek to ultimately return to their own homelands is also important, and we've pledged our support with those efforts, as we've done with other countries like Panama. We recognize that in addition to those who may be returned because they're currently in the United States, there are those who are here now from faraway places, and we are pledged to do all we can to help assist getting them from here to their final destinations in their homelands. In addition, our law enforcement cooperation is very strong. Tragically, Guatemala, because of its geography, has been a place of transshipment of drugs. One time it was through small little airplanes that landed in clandestine fields. One time it was 70, 80 flights a year. Now last year I think there was one. And we hope this year it'll be zero. And that's thanks to the dedication that the authorities here have placed in shutting that down. But those maritime routes and other routes still exist. And it takes resources and, frankly, courage and dedication to go after those routes and shut down those routes. And we today will reauthorize programs that allow us to continue to work in partnership to stop that from happening. Drug trafficking organizations who do not simply leave violence along the way and obviously ship drugs into the United States that are very deadly, but they also, their existence in any country, one of the impacts that it has is it creates corruption, it compromises institutions, and makes it harder to govern a country and progress moving forward. We recognize that that is the nefarious metastasis that often happens with the presence of these groups, and we are going to continue to do everything we can to help in that endeavor. And today I'll be signing waivers on foreign aid that will continue that partnership and hope to build on it as well. In addition, there are opportunities to cooperate economically. Today I've signed a letter of support pledging the full cooperation of the State Department on a very specific project, which is the partnership between the government of Guatemala and the Army Corps of Engineers in the United States to begin preliminary planning for the expansion of not one but two new port facilities, and in addition to that, the opportunity to do the interconnections through highways and railroads so that Guatemala can become an economic hub of trade and commerce, creating even more opportunity for the people of the region and of Guatemala. And finally, we must recognize the commitment the President and his administration have had to democracy and to freedom, and to respect for institutions and the rule of law. Democracy is a pretty new concept. It's less than 300 years old. It's easy to write on a piece of paper. It's hard to maintain. And your commitment to maintaining and defending democracy and the stability of institutions, the integrity of institutions, is critical for Guatemala's future. It's critical for all of our futures in every country where it's threatened. And in particular, as part of that, is your longstanding friendship and relationship with the people of Taiwan. And we hope and we'll do all we can to expand it beyond just the diplomatic realm to an economic one. We'll do all we can to facilitate more Taiwanese investment in the economy of Guatemala so that it can continue to grow into the advanced, prosperous 21st century economy that allows it to be a place where all of its people can flourish and prosper and leave their children better off than themselves. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias.
Hemos escuchado las
We
palabras
have
del secretario
heard
de Estado,
the
Marco Rubio.
Secretary
En
of
este
State,
momento
Marco Rubio,
procederemos
and at
al
this
espacio de
time
preguntas y
we
respuestas.
answer
La
questions.
primera pregunta
The first
por
question
Guatemala
by
la realiza el
Guatemala
periodista Eduardo
by
Perea.
Eduardo Pereira.
Muy buenos días, señor presidente.
Good morning,
Secretario
President, Secretary
quisiera
Rubio.
consultarle qué
I'd
tan
like to
preparada
ask
está
you how
Guatemala
prepared
al
is Guatemala, how
considerarse como
ready
el
is
tercer país
Guatemala
seguro
to be
y cuál es su
considered a
postura
third
oficial
safe
hacia
country,
China
and what
y
is
Taiwán.
your official position regarding China and Taiwan? Good morning. A pleasure to see you again. A safe country is not a topic that exists. It was not discussed in title or content. What we have now is a new migration arrangement that guarantees safety, humanitarian conditions for repatriation processes in the case of Guatemalans and for the case of deportations of other nationals in such a way that they can continue on to their respective countries of origin, which are elements that have nothing to do with the concept of third safe country. About your second question, our relationship with Taiwan, we have stated from the first moment that we maintain our diplomatic relationship with Taiwan and that we hope to be able to improve on them within the framework of our government administration, to be able to further develop them in terms of economics and investment, as Secretary
La
Rubio
segunda
has said.
pregunta es por
The second
Estados
question
Unidos
is
con el periodista
by the United
Eric
States,
Marty.
Eric Matke.
Sí. Gracias. Thank you, Secretary Rubio, Presidente Arevalo. Secretary Rubio, I'd like to ask you about USAID. Guatemala has been a large recipient of USAID in recent years as a developing nation, and the halt to funding, we've spoken with contractors and foreign service officers who work for you. They say that the impact on life-saving programs worldwide, even with the waiver, has been severe. Has provoked chaos and confusion among rank-and-file staff who say it's been severely demoralizing, especially the order to return home. Isn't all of this angst, confusion, and upheaval a gift to America's geostrategic rivals such as Russia and China? And Presidente Arevalo, quiero preguntar...
President Arevalo, I would like to ask you, first of all, I'd like to say that it's a pleasure to see you again. We saw each other last in Washington before you were inaugurated as president. Now, regarding the return of Guatemalans from the U.S., what kind of work or jobs do you expect that deportees will be able to do here in Guatemala? What is the role of the private sector in the reintegration process? And could you please share a few of the companies that are involved in the My First Home initiative? Thank you to both of you.
Question first. Let me walk everybody through these steps. They're important. Our goal for USAID was to align the programs that it fulfills with the foreign policy of the United States. What would be a gift to our geopolitical rivals is billions of dollars in foreign aid that is not aligned to the national interest and the foreign policy of the United States. If you read the statute that created USAID, it is supposed to take policy direction from the President, the National Security Council, and the Secretary of State. And yet, over the last 2 decades, it has not, and it has gotten worse and worse. And multiple administrations have complained about it, but none have done anything about it. We are going to do something about it. Our preference was to go into USAID and work from the top down in identifying all of our programs. What are all the programs we fund around the world? Which are the ones that make us safer, stronger, and more prosperous? Which are the ones that align us with the foreign policy of the United States? And which are the ones that we should not be involved in? Not only is this a good idea, we owe it to the American taxpayer because this is taxpayer money. This is not a charity. These are not private funds. This is American taxpayer funds, and we have an obligation to spend it wisely. It is not even in some ways, some of that money could be freed up to be spent even more money on the real priorities by repurposing it. That was our hope. Unfortunately, we had very little cooperation. We didn't have that problem at State Department, by the way. At State Department, our program officers, we had a really good insight, and that's why every single day we are issuing waivers on State Department programs. On USAID, unfortunately, we did not get the same level of cooperation. In fact, we had individuals, even after the orders were issued, that were still trying to push payments through in contravention and in direct insubordination. And so now we've had to do it in the opposite direction. It is not the direction I wanted it to, it's not the way we wanted to do it initially, but it is the way we will have to do it now. About the notice that was issued yesterday, if you read on it, it says language, very specific language. It talks about specially designated programs as being exempt from the order of returning home. And that language is deliberate because we are now going to have to work from the bottom up instead of the top down to identify which programs should be specially designated and therefore exempted from that order. Our preference would have been to do this in a more orderly fashion from the top down, but we had no cooperation and in fact insubordination, and so it required us to work from the bottom up. And so we are, as I speak to you now, openly engaging missions all over the world that have a USAID presence to identify which programs they are running so that we can define those that we're going to specially designate because they further our national and are aligned with our national interests. And those that do not, will not continue. This is not about ending foreign aid, it is about structuring it in a way that furthers the national interest of the United States. And in fact, because I'm here today, we've already had insight into what some of those programs are here that contribute to some of the things we've discussed here today. That is what we seek to preserve because they further our national interest, because they make us stronger, because they make us safer, because they allow our economy to grow and create prosperity, not just for us, but for our partners and allies. And that's what we hope to be able to achieve here in the coming hours and days.
Sobre su pregunta
About your question
sobre los retornados,
about
es muy difícil
returnees, it is
definir
very difficult
de
to
antemano,
decide in advance
dónde se va a
where
poder ubicar
we will be
a
able
los
to
retornados
locate
porque es
returnees
una población
because
de la que todavía no
this is a
sabemos exactamente
population
quiénes son, qué
that we
habilidades traen,
don't
qué
know well
capacidades
yet
tienen, porque las
what
adquirieron,
skills they bring
si son
back, what
formales, si son
capacities they
informales,
bring, whether they're formal,
y es
informal,
únicamente a partir
and it
de
is
ese
only
conocimiento que
based
uno
on
puede
that knowledge
buscar y
that we can
explorar
look for and
la
explore
mejor manera de
the
ayudarlos a
best way
integrarse
to
al mercado
help
laboral
them
guatemalteco y
to
explorar
become a part of the labor
distintas
market in
posibilidades,
Guatemala and
no
explore
únicamente
different
en términos de
possibilities, not
trabajo,
only
sino
in terms of
posiblemente en
jobs,
términos de
but
inversión. Algunos
possibly
de
in
ellos
terms
querrán
of
venir, vendrán
investment.
con
Some of
ahorros,
them
podremos
may
poner a su
be coming with
disposición
savings, and
créditos,
we
etcétera.
can make
Entonces, lo que
credit
estamos
available to
haciendo
them,
es,
and so
en
on
el
and so
marco
forth.
de
In the
nuestro plan
framework
Retorno al
of
Hogar,
our return
en la
home
segunda fase
plan,
del plan,
in the second phase of the
nosotros
plan,
tenemos establecido
we
un
have
proceso
established
mediante el
a
cual
process through
el
which
Ministerio de
the ministry,
la Dirección de Migración
the,
con el
the
Ministerio de
Migration
Trabajo
Institute with the Ministry of
conjuntamente
Labor
entrevistan a
together
los retornados
interview
para identificar
returnees to
precisamente cuáles son sus
identify
calificaciones,
precisely their
cuáles son sus
qualifications,
capacidades,
their
si traen o
capabilities,
no
their
algunas de estas de manera formal, y entonces empiezan a
skills
entender.
if they bring them
Por otra
formally,
parte,
and to be able to begin to
nosotros estamos
understand all of
en
it. On the other
conversaciones
hand,
con,
we are holding
distintas,
conversations with different
compañías, empresas y con el sector privado en
companies,
general,
the
para
private sector in
identificar,
general, to
aquellas que
identify
están
those
dispuestas
that
a
are ready
absorber algunos
to
de estos
absorb
migrantes.
some of
Pero
these
esa
migrants.
disponibilidad
But
va a
this
depender
availability will
de
be
las
dependent on the
capacidades que vayamos
capabilities that we
identificando a medida que
identify
vengan. Que,
as a
por ejemplo,
return. For
nosotros
example,
tenemos previsto, va a haber
we
gente que va a
expect
venir
there's going to be
con
people who
mucha
come
experiencia
with vast
en algún tema,
experience
porque
in
estuvo trabajando,
one
por ejemplo,
topic. To
en,
give you an example,
instalación de aire acondicionado,
in installing air
pero lo hizo sin
conditioners,
tener ninguna
but did it
formación
without any
técnica formal.
technical
No tiene
formal
ningún
training. They
certificado
don't
para
have a
comprobarlo.
certificate to confirm that
Nosotros,
they
al identificar
are
que tenemos una
qualified
persona
in
con esas
identifying a
capacidades
person
sin
with
un
those
certificado, lo ponemos
skills
en un
without a
programa de
certificate. We will
certificación
send them to
con
a
el INTECAP
certificate
o con el
program with
Ministerio de Educación
INTECAP
que va
or the
a
Ministry of
reconocer
Education that will
esa
recognize
habilidad y de
that
esa manera
skill,
va a
and in this
facilitar
manner
el hecho de que pueda ser,
will
por
make
ejemplo,
it
absorbido
possible
por una empresa que está
for
buscando
him,
técnicos
her to be
en
absorbed by a
refrigeración.
company
Un
that is
ejemplo muy
looking for
sencillo.
technicians
Nosotros
in
sabemos que,
refrigeration. A very simple
los,
example, we know
nuestros retornados
that
van a
our
traer
returnees
un
will
dominio del inglés
come back
que para una
speaking
industria
English,
turística
which for the
en
tourism
expansión como la de Guatemala es
industry that
necesaria.
is growing in
Guatemala
Guatemala
creció
is
el
necessary.
turismo en
Tourism in Guatemala grew by
13.7%
13.7%.
pasado.
Last
Superamos los 3
year,
millones
we exceeded 3
barreras. Es una industria
million
en crecimiento
visitors.
y
It's a
todas
growing
estas
industry,
personas
and all of
que
these
traen el
persons
idioma inglés,
who
pero que
now
además
come with
pueden traer
English as an
experiencias en
added
industrias de
skill,
la
but
hospitalidad,
might also
como
bring
habiendo
experience
trabajado en
in the
hoteles, habiendo
hospitality
trabajado en
industry,
restaurantes,
hotels,
habiendo trabajado en cruceros.
restaurants,
Todas estas
cruise
personas
ships. All of
pueden
these
ser
persons
reabsorbidas, pero la
can
primera
be
tarea
reabsorbed,
es
but the
tener este
first
proceso
task is
de,
go through this process
diagnóstico,
of
por llamarlo de alguna manera, de
diagnosis, to call
clasificación
it
inicial,
something, of
para poder
initial
hacer esa identificación
classification to be able
de
to
la oferta laboral
identify
que
the
tenemos con
labor
la
supply
demanda
that we
laboral que
have
el
and
sector privado
the labor demand that the private sector will have.
Continuamos. La
We
siguiente
then
pregunta
continue.
es
The
por
next
Guatemala.
question is by
Escuchamos al
Guatemala,
periodista
by
Sergio Morales.
Sergio Morales, journalist. President, Secretary, good afternoon. Welcome to Guatemala. Well, let's say if these agreements don't become true, what can Guatemala do? Speaking about sanctions, I would like to ask you if the United States is going to keep the sanctions against persons accused of corruption and anti-democratic practices, because many of them contributed to the triumph of President Trump. And last, I want to ask you about Taiwan. How much are you concerned about Chinese influence in Guatemala through a gigantic technological company whereby they have become positioned in the agencies of the state? How much concern do you have? In the first part, this is not a question of...
We have a need domestically for an ally country that's helping us. It's a matter of people who have the obligation to accept under international agreements, and we're just cooperating in this process. It's not a matter of sanctioning a government for not cooperating. That's what friends and allies do to help each other out, as we are committed to working with you on several projects, not only in economic development, but also confronting drug trafficking and other actors that try to corrupt the country. The second phase, we've only been in power for 2 weeks. There have been no changes to sanctions against individuals. So far, every administration always reviews existing sanctions that they have inherited from previous administrations, but to date, no decisions have been made in that regard, nor have these been discussed or contemplated. And third, regarding the China question, yes, it is difficult. We know that the government in Beijing is committed not only to breaking those ties, but also to coming into important sectors of the economy, and they are obsessed with establishing or dominating telecommunications through Huawei and other companies. And this is a very serious threat to a country's security, to be able to communicate without interruptions. They also like to make a lot of promises. We've seen case after case where the Chinese government comes in with billions of dollars that they promise. They start a project, but then they never finish. They bring in their own workers to do the work, and in the end, the project is either incomplete or they are in debt, and now a government owes them billions of dollars in what we call a debt trap, and we want governments to know about that risk. I also think that the relationship with Taiwan, as I said, will do everything we can to help with that. We are going to support it not only being diplomatic recognition, but for it to also have economic benefits, to do anything possible to bring investment in the economy, Guatemala's developing economy.
Tenemos la siguiente pregunta.
Next
Y
question,
última pregunta
and
también
last
por
question
Estados
also by the
Unidos,
United
a cargo de
States,
Celia
by
Mendoza.
Celia Mendoza.
Muchísimas gracias a ambos.
Thanks
Secretary
very much to
Rubio,
both of you.
how is the administration planning to carry out the proposal of President Trump to own Gaza and relocate Palestinians? For how long the U.S. will be planning to stay in that territory, and how can you accomplish the rebuild plan as regional partners have rejected the proposal to forcibly relocate Palestinians advocate for the two-state solution, and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has called for the United Nations to step in to protect the rights of the Palestinian people. And Presidente, la pregunta para ustedes,
President,
sabemos
the
que
question
ahora
for
van a
you
estar
is,
en
we
este
know that
acuerdo
now
similar de
you will have an
Panamá.
agreement that is
Van a
similar to the one
recibir
in Panama.
nacionales
Will you
extranjeros
receive
en
foreign
Guatemala
nationals
y
in
nuestros nuevos que
Guatemala
vienen de
on these
deportación
flights,
desde
the
los
deportation
Estados
flights coming from the
Unidos?
United
¿Cómo
States?
funcionaría
And
igual
how
que
would
en
that
El
work?
Salvador? ¿Estarían
And
ustedes dispuestos
as
a
in El
recibir
Salvador,
miembros del
would you
Tren de
be
Aragua o de
willing
otras
to
pandillas
receive
y grupos
members of
criminales?
gangs such as Tren de Aragua or the
Let me
criminal
answer the
gangs?
first question. What President Trump said yesterday is an acknowledgement of the following. Gaza has been severely damaged. If you look at the aerial imagery, you see what's happening. The billions of dollars that are going to be required for reconstruction are enormous. Some areas have been rendered unlivable now and for the foreseeable future. And so what President Trump announced yesterday is the offer, the willingness of the United States to become responsible for the reconstruction of that area. And while you are rebuilding, while you're clearing debris, by the way, there are unexploded munitions, there are all kinds of Hamas weaponry still buried underground. For people to be able to live in a place safely, all of that has to be removed. It's an enormous undertaking. And the only thing President Trump has done very generously, in my view, is offer the United States willingness to step in, clear the debris, clean the place up from all the destruction that's on the ground, clean it up of all these unexploded munitions. And in the meantime, the people living there will not be able, the people who call that home will not be able to live there while you have crews coming in and removing debris, while you have munitions being removed, etc. That's the offer that he's made. It's actually, he made a similar, obviously we didn't have a conflict at the time, but when he, in his first term, he offered a $50 billion plan to help Palestinians, which was rejected by the PA and obviously others. So in the interim, obviously, people are going to have to live somewhere while you're rebuilding it. It is akin to a natural disaster. So what he's very generously has offered is the ability of the United States to go in and help with debris removal, help with munitions removal, help with reconstruction, the rebuilding of homes and businesses and things of this nature, so that then people can move back in. But in the meantime, they'll have to live somewhere. Now, the details of that, if it was accepted, would have to be worked out among multiple partner nations. It's a unique offer, one that no other country in the world has stepped up and made an offer. But I think it's one people need to think about. Seriously, it was not meant as a hostile move. It was meant as I think, a very generous move, the offer to rebuild and to be in charge of the rebuilding of a place, many parts of which right now, even if people move back, they would have nowhere to live safely because there are still unexploded munitions and debris and rubble.
Sobre su pregunta, en primer lugar,
About your
¿cómo
question, first
funciona
and foremost,
en el
how
caso
does it
de
work in
aquellos
the
extranjeros
case of
que
the foreigners,
ciudadanos de otras nacionalidades
citizens
que
of foreign
llegaran a
nationalities that
Guatemala en
may
el
come
marco
to
de
Guatemala
estos
in the framework of
vuelos?
these flights?
Lo hacen en el marco
They do
de
it
su repatriación continuada.
And
De manera
as
que
part of their
las formas de
continued
cómo va a continuar esta
repatriation, so the
repatriación,
way that
cómo
this
va a
repatriation
cooperar
will be
los Estados Unidos, el
pursued,
gobierno de
how
Guatemala,
the
cómo vamos a
United
hacer,
States is
son
going to
temas que
cooperate
vamos a
with the
estar
government of
discutiendo en
Guatemala
una
are
mesa
topics that we
de
are going to be
trabajo
discussing
bilateral
in a
que se
bilateral
ha
working
acordado
group
de establecer
that we
el día
have
de hoy.
agreed today
Y
on
no ha habido
establishing.
ninguna
There
discusión
has been no
alrededor de
discussion around
criminales condenados en
convicted
el marco de
criminals
estos flujos.
in the framework of those
Agradecemos la
flows.
información brindada
We
por las
thank
altas
the
autoridades
high
acá
authorities
en el
for the
Valle de la Paz
information
del
that
Palacio
they have
Nacional de la Cultura.
provided at the National
En este momento
Palace
presenciamos
of
el
Culture
egreso del
and
señor
the
presidente de la
Courtyard for
República de
Peace.
Guatemala,
We
así como del señor
now
secretario de
bid
Estado,
farewell
el
to the
señor
President of
Marco
Guatemala
Rubio.
and
De esta
United
manera damos por
States
concluida
Secretary of
esta
State,
conferencia
Marco
de prensa.
Rubio. And
Muchísimas
with
gracias
this,
por
this
su
press
presencia,
conference comes
amigos
to
de
an
los medios de
end.
comunicación
Thank you very
nacionales
much, friends
e
from the
internacionales.
media, both